The gun pressed against Elena Marchetti's spine the moment she stepped past the iron gate. She froze, her fingers tightening around the small velvet pouch in her coat pocket. Rain dripped from her hair onto her collar, and her heart slammed so hard she thought the man behind her could hear it. "Turn around slowly," a rough voice said. "Hands where I can see them." Elena raised both hands and turned. Two men stood in front of her, both wearing black coats that made them look like shadows carved out of the night. Behind them stood a mansion so large it seemed to swallow the sky, its windows dark except for one lit room on the top floor. "I found something," Elena said, keeping her voice steady even though her knees were shaking. "It belongs to your boss. I only came to return it." The taller guard narrowed his eyes. Nobody walks onto cross property uninvited, not after what happened last month. "I tried calling. I tried the front office downtown. Nobody would listen to me," Elena said. "I have his ring." The two men exchanged a look. Something shifted in their expressions, a flicker of surprise that quickly hardened back into suspicion. "Show me," the shorter one said. Elena reached into her pocket, careful and slow, and pulled out the velvet pouch. She opened it just enough for them to see the gleam of gold inside, a heavy signet ring engraved with a crest of two crossed swords beneath a crown. The taller guard's face changed completely. He stepped back as if the ring had burned him. "Wait here," he said, and disappeared through the front doors without another word. Elena stood in the rain, soaked through, her breath coming out in short clouds. She had found the ring 3 nights ago, lying in a gutter outside an old church on the edge of the city, half buried in mud beside a broken drainpipe. She almost hadn't noticed it. She almost hadn't picked it up. But something about the weight of it in her palm, the strange crest, the initials carved on the inside band, had told her it mattered to someone. It had taken her 3 days of phone calls and dead ends to learn exactly who. Damien Cross. The name alone made people go quiet in this city. Waiters stopped talking. Shopkeepers looked away. Even the police seemed to avoid saying it too loudly. Elena had heard stories, the kind that got passed around like ghost tales, about a man who ran half the ports and half the underground trade routes from Newham to the river docks. A man who never smiled, never married, and never let anyone close enough to matter. She had told herself this was simple. Return the ring, walk away, forget she ever touched something that belonged to a man like that. But standing here now, soaked and cold, watching the mansion doors swing open again, she understood this would not be simple at all. The taller guard returned, his expression unreadable. "He wants to see you." Elena's stomach dropped. "I just need to give him the ring. I don't need to see him." "That's not how this works," the guard said. "Come with me." She followed him through the gates, past a fountain that had stopped running, past security cameras mounted like watching eyes on every corner of the building. The inside of the mansion was colder than the rain outside. Marble floors stretched in every direction, polished so clean they reflected the chandeliers above like still water. Everything was silent, except for the click of her wet shoes against stone. They climbed a wide staircase, turned down a long hallway lined with paintings of men who all seemed to share the same sharp jaw and unreadable eyes, and stopped in front of a set of double doors made of dark wood. The guard knocked twice, then opened the door and stepped aside. "Go in," he said. Elena hesitated only a second before walking through. The room was an office, large and dim, lit only by a single lamp on a wide desk and the pale gray light coming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Rain streaked down the glass, blurring the city lights beyond into smears of gold and white. A man stood near the window with his back to her, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark suit despite the late hour. He did not turn around right away. He simply stood there, staring out at the storm, as if she were not even worth his full attention yet. "You found something of mine," he said finally. His voice was low, controlled, each word placed with precision, like he measured everything before he let it leave his mouth. "Yes," Elena said. "I found a ring near the old church on Faro Street. I believe it's yours." He turned then, and Elena's breath caught before she could stop it. Damien Cross looked nothing like she expected, and exactly like every rumor she had ever heard at the same time. His face was carved from hard lines, a sharp jaw, dark eyes that held no warmth at all, He looked like a man who had trained himself, over many years, to feel absolutely nothing. But there was something underneath that stillness, something coiled and tense, like a wire pulled too tight. "Show me," he said. Elena took the velvet pouch from her pocket and set it on the edge of his desk, careful not to step too close. Damien crossed the room in a few long strides and opened the pouch himself. The moment his eyes landed on the ring, something in his expression cracked, just for an instant, before he shut it down again. He picked up the ring and turned it over in his fingers, studying the crest, the initials engraved inside the band. His jaw tightened. "Where exactly did you find this?" he asked, his voice quieter now, almost dangerous in how calm it sounded. "Near the old church," Elena repeated. "By a drain pipe. It was half buried in the mud." "That church has been closed for 11 years, Damien said, more to himself than to her. "I didn't know that. I just saw something gold in the mud and picked it up. I tried to find out who it belonged to. Nobody would help me until I mentioned the crest to a jeweler downtown. He told me who might own something like this." Damien's eyes lifted to hers, sharp and assessing, like he was trying to read every thought behind her face. "And you decided to walk it directly into cross territory. Do you understand how many people would have used this as a way to get close to me? A ring like this opens doors. You could have sold information about it. You could have used it as leverage." "I could have," Elena said, meeting his gaze even though her pulse was hammering. "I didn't. I just wanted to return what wasn't mine." Something flickered behind his eyes again, quick, unreadable, gone before she could name it. "Nobody does that," he said. "Not in this city. Not with me." "Maybe nobody's tried," Elena said. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain kept hitting the windows, and the lamp on the desk cast long shadows across the room, stretching between them like something neither of them wanted to cross. Damien studied her more closely now, the way she stood without flinching under his gaze, the way her chin lifted slightly instead of dropping the way most people's did when they stood in this office. Everyone who came through those double doors either wanted a favor, feared for their life, or both. She looked like neither. She looked like someone who simply wanted the conversation to be over so she could go home and forget she had ever seen the inside of this house. "Sit down," he said, gesturing toward the leather chair across from his desk. Elena blinked. "I thought you wanted me to leave." "I changed my mind," he said. "Sit." She lowered herself into the chair slowly, keeping her coat wrapped tight around her, the wet fabric clinging uncomfortably to her arms. Damien remained standing, the ring still closed in his fist, his eyes fixed on her like she was a puzzle he hadn't decided how to solve yet. "Tell me about yourself," he said. "Not your name. I already know that. Tell me what you do, why you were near that church. Why a woman who has clearly never set foot in a place like this decided to walk straight through my gates instead of leaving the ring with a stranger and forgetting about it." Elena hesitated, unsure how much to say. "I work at a small print shop near the harbor. I was walking home late because my shift ran long, and I cut through Faro Street because it's faster. That's when I saw something gold in the mud." She paused. "As for why I brought it myself, I suppose I didn't trust anyone else to actually deliver it. People talk about you like you're a ghost story. I wanted to make sure it reached a real person, not just some rumor." Something in Damien's expression shifted again, subtle, almost imperceptible, like a door opening a crack before shutting just as fast. "Most people who hear the rumors stay far away," he said. "You didn't. Most people also wouldn't have picked up a stranger's ring out of the mud and spent 3 days trying to return it," Elena said. "I suppose neither of us does what most people do." For the briefest moment, something close to amusement passed across Damien's face, though it vanished before it could fully form into anything as soft as a smile. "What's your name?" Damien finally asked. "Elena. Elena Marchetti." He said nothing else for a moment, just studied her face like he was trying to memorize it, or maybe trying to find the trick in it, the angle, the thing she really wanted. People who met Damien Cross always wanted something. That was the one truth his entire life had taught him. "You should go," he said abruptly, turning back toward the window. "My men will see you out safely." Elena blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift. "That's it? I just wanted to be sure it reached you." It reached me, he said, his back to her again. You've done what you came to do. She stood there a second longer, feeling oddly unsatisfied by how quickly the conversation had ended, though she couldn't explain why it bothered her. She turned to leave, her hand already on the door, when his voice stopped her. Elena. She turned back. Damien was still facing the window, the ring now closed tightly in his fist. Thank you, he said, the words coming out stiff, like he hadn't used them in a long time and wasn't sure how they were supposed to sound. You're welcome, Elena said quietly, and left the room. The walk back through the mansion felt longer than the walk in. The guards escorted her to the gates without a word, and the heavy iron doors closed behind her with a metallic clang that echoed down the empty street. Elena stood outside in the rain for a moment, catching her breath, wondering why her hands were still shaking, even though the danger, whatever danger there had been, seemed to be over. She didn't know that Damien Cross had not moved from the window in nearly 10 minutes after she left. She didn't know that he had opened his palm and stared at the ring for a long time, turning it slowly, remembering a night 11 years ago that he had spent every day since trying to forget. She also didn't know that her name, Elena Marchetti, had just been written into a file that Damien kept locked in the bottom drawer of his desk, a file that held the names of everyone connected, however loosely, to the night his family was betrayed. 3 streets away, in a car with tinted windows, a man sat watching Elena walk toward the bus stop, his phone pressed to his ear. She went in, the man said quietly. She came out again. 20 minutes, maybe less. There was a pause as he listened to whoever was on the other end. No, boss, she didn't take anything with her. Just the clothes on her back, he said. Then, after another pause, you want me to keep watching her? He listened again, his eyes narrowing, as he studied Elena's figure disappearing into the rain. Understood, he said, and ended the call. The car did not move. It stayed parked at the corner, engine idling, headlights off, as Elena boarded a bus 2 blocks away, completely unaware that her simple act of honesty had just placed her under the watch of people far more dangerous than she could imagine. Back in the mansion, Damien finally moved from the window. He sat down at his desk and placed the ring carefully into a small wooden box beside a framed photograph, the only photograph in the entire room. The photograph showed a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, standing in front of a garden full of white roses. He stared at the photograph for a long moment, his jaw tight, his hands still. 11 years, he murmured to no one, and now this. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he rarely used anymore. I need everything on a woman named Elena Marchetti, he said when the call connected. Where she works, where she lives, who she talks to. I want it by morning. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Boss, is there a problem? Did she do something? No, Damien said slowly. She returned something that belonged to me. I want to understand why. You think it's a setup? Damien's eyes moved back to the ring resting in the wooden box. I don't know yet. That's why I want the information. Nobody returns something like this without wanting something in exchange, even if they don't know it themselves yet. I'll have it ready by morning, the voice said, and the call ended. He ended the call and sat back in his chair, the rain still hammering against the windows, the city lights blurring beyond the glass. His mind drifted unwillingly to the way Elena had looked at him in that chair, steady and unafraid, answering his questions without the trembling voice or the false sweetness most people used when they wanted something from him. He had spent 11 years cataloging the different ways people tried to manipulate him, the flattery, the fear, the careful words designed to win his trust so they could later betray it. He knew every version of that game by heart. Elena hadn't played any of them. That unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. For 11 years, Damien Cross had built walls around himself so high that nobody could reach him. He had turned away every woman his family tried to introduce him to, every arranged meeting, every so-called perfect match. He had told himself he didn't need anyone, that trust was a weakness he could not afford, not after what happened, not after the ring had first gone missing on the worst night of his life. But something about the woman who had walked into his office tonight, soaked from the rain, refusing to look away from him even when her hands were shaking, had cracked something open that he thought had been sealed shut for good. He didn't like it. He didn't like it at all. Across the city, Elena sat on the bus, her forehead resting against the cold window glass, watching the streetlights blur past in streaks of yellow. She thought about the strange stillness in Damien Cross's office, the way his eyes had changed when he saw the ring, the way his voice had cracked just slightly when he said thank you. She told herself it didn't matter. She had done a good thing, returned something that wasn't hers, and now her part in this story was finished. She had no way of knowing that a car was still following the bus at a careful distance, its headlights dark, its driver patient. She had no way of knowing that somewhere in that cold mansion, a file with her name on it was already being opened. And she had no way of knowing that the man she had just met, the coldest man in the entire city, had already decided, in some quiet corner of his guarded heart, that he was not finished with her yet. When the bus finally reached her stop, Elena stepped down into the rain and walked the last 2 blocks to her small apartment above a shuttered bakery. She climbed the narrow stairs, unlocked her door, and stood in the dark hallway for a moment before switching on the light. Her apartment was small and plain, nothing like the marble halls she had just walked through, but it was hers, quiet and safe, or so she believed. She peeled off her wet coat and hung it by the door, then sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her hands, as if she could still feel the weight of the ring against her palm. She thought about Damien Cross's eyes, dark and guarded, and the strange crack of emotion that had passed through them when he first saw the ring. Whatever story lived behind that reaction, she told herself it was none of her business. She had done what she set out to do. The ring had reached its owner. That was the end of it. She turned off the light and lay back against her pillow, listening to the rain tapping against her window, unaware that far across the city, in a locked drawer inside a cold office, a file bearing her name had just been created, the first page of a story that was only beginning. The knock on Elena's apartment door came at 6 in the morning, sharp and urgent enough to pull her straight out of sleep. She sat up fast, her heart pounding, the memory of the night before rushing back all at once. The mansion. The ring. The cold eyes of Damien Cross studying her like she was a puzzle. For a moment, she wondered if she had dreamed the whole thing, but then the knock came again, harder this time. She crossed the room and looked through the peephole. A woman stood outside, dressed in a sharp gray coat, her expression calm but alert, like someone who had done this exact task many times before. "Who is it?" Elena called through the door. "My name is Odette. I work for Mr. Cross," the woman said. "I need a few minutes of your time." Elena's stomach tightened. She opened the door slowly, keeping the chain latched. "It's 6 in the morning." "I know," Odette said. "I apologize for the hour. This couldn't wait." Elena hesitated, then unlatched the chain and opened the door fully. Odette stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her eyes sweeping the small apartment in a single practiced glance, taking in every detail before settling back on Elena. "What is this about?" Elena asked, pulling her robe tighter around herself. "I gave the ring back. I don't understand what more he could want." "This isn't about what he wants from you," Odette said. "It's about what you need to know before this goes any further. You're already involved, whether you intended to be or not. The ring you returned belonged to Damien's mother. She died the same night it went missing, 11 years ago, during an attack on the Cross family that nearly destroyed everything they had built. The person responsible was never caught. Damien has spent every year since then trying to find out who did it." Elena's breath caught. "And he thinks I have something to do with that." "He doesn't know what to think yet," Odette said. "That's the problem. A ring that vanished 11 years ago doesn't simply reappear in the mud outside an abandoned church unless someone put it there. Someone who knew exactly where to leave it and exactly who would eventually find it." "I found it by accident," Elena said, her voice rising slightly. "I wasn't looking for anything. I was walking home." "I believe you," Odette said, surprising her. "But belief doesn't matter much in this world. Evidence does, and right now, you are the only new piece of evidence anyone has had in over a decade. That makes you valuable to Damien, and dangerous to certain people who would prefer this case stayed buried." Elena sank onto the edge of her small kitchen table, her mind spinning. "What people?" "The kind who don't like loose threads," Odette said simply. "I'm not here to frighten you. I'm here because Damien asked me to make sure you understood the situation before anyone else found you first. From this point forward, you should assume you are being watched, whether you agree to help or not." "Watched," Elena repeated, the word sitting strange and heavy in her mouth. "There was a car outside your building last night," Odette said. "It left an hour ago. Damien's men, keeping an eye on things. But they are not the only ones who might already know your name." Elena stood up, pacing the small kitchen, her thoughts racing faster than she could organize them. 2 days ago her life had been simple. Work at the print shop, evenings alone with a book. Nothing more complicated than deciding what to make for dinner. Now she was being told she had unknowingly stepped into the middle of a murder that had gone unsolved for 11 years. "What does he want from me?" she finally asked. "He wants to know everything about how you found that ring," Odette said. "Every detail. He's asked me to bring you to him again this morning, if you're willing." "And if I'm not willing?" Odette's expression softened slightly, the first real emotion Elena had seen from her since she arrived. "Then I would still advise you to be careful. Damien is not the danger here, Elena. Whoever placed that ring where you could find it is." Elena stood silent for a long moment, staring out her small window at the gray morning light spreading over the rooftops. She thought about the strange crack in Damien's composure when he first saw the ring, the way his voice had wavered slightly when he said thank you. She thought about the file Odette said had already been opened with her name on it, the car outside her building, the idea that somewhere out there, someone might already know exactly where she lived. "I'll go," she said finally. "I want answers too." Odette nodded, as if she had expected nothing less. "Get dressed, the car is waiting." The drive to the Cross estate felt different in daylight than it had the night before. The mansion looked less like a shadow and more like a fortress, its gray stone walls stretching up against a pale morning sky, guards posted at intervals along the perimeter that Elena hadn't noticed in the dark. Damien was waiting in the same office, though this time the curtains were open, letting in gray light that made the room feel slightly less like a cave and slightly more like an actual place where a person lived. He stood near his desk, arms crossed, watching her enter with an expression that gave away nothing. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Odette told me about your mother," Elena said, deciding there was no use pretending otherwise. "I'm sorry. I didn't know what I was carrying when I picked that ring out of the mud." Something passed behind Damien's eyes, quick and sharp, gone before it could settle into anything readable. "Sit down. I need you to walk me through everything, every detail. What time it was, what the street looked like, whether you saw anyone else nearby." Elena sat and told him everything she could remember, the late shift at the print shop, the shortcut through Faro Street to save 10 minutes on her walk home, the flash of gold catching the streetlight as she passed the old drainpipe. She described the mud, the way the ring had been half buried like it had been there for a while, the fact that she hadn't seen another person on that street the entire walk. Damien listened without interrupting, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel like every word she said was being weighed and measured against something only he could see. "You're certain no one else was there," he said when she finished. "No cars, no one watching from a doorway." "I'm certain," Elena said. It was late. The street was empty. Damien walked to the window, his back to her again, the same posture he had held the night before. "That church was where my mother used to go every week, before it closed. The night she died, she had gone there alone to meet someone. We never learned who. The ring disappeared that same night, and we assumed whoever attacked her took it. For 11 years, I believed it was gone forever, sold off somewhere, melted down, anything but sitting in the mud waiting for someone to find it. Maybe whoever took it panicked," Elena offered quietly. "Maybe they dropped it running away and never had the chance to go back for it." "Maybe," Damien said, though his tone made clear he didn't fully believe it. "Or maybe someone wanted it found, wanted it to resurface now, after all this time, for reasons I don't yet understand." Elena felt a chill move through her at the thought. "You think someone is sending you a message?" "I think it's too convenient," Damien said, turning back to face her. "A ring buried for 11 years doesn't simply wash up in the mud on a night you happen to walk past. Someone placed it there. Someone who knew that street, knew that church, knew exactly what that ring would mean to me if it ever reappeared." "But why involve me?" Elena asked. I'm nobody. I have no connection to any of this. That's what worries me, Damien said. If someone chose you specifically, there's a reason, and until I know what that reason is, you're not safe walking around this city alone. Elena's chest tightened. Are you saying I'm in danger? I'm saying I don't yet know how much danger, Damien said honestly. And until I do, I'd prefer you stayed somewhere I can protect you. I have a life, Elena said, her voice firmer now. A job, an apartment. I can't just disappear into your world because you're worried about a theory. It's not a theory, Damien said, his voice sharpening slightly. 11 years ago, my mother died in an attack that was never solved. Yesterday, the one piece of evidence connected to that night reappeared in the hands of a stranger who happened to walk down a street she rarely uses, at exactly the right hour to find it. If you think that's coincidence, you don't understand how this world works. Elena opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again, the weight of his words settling over her. She thought about the car Odette mentioned outside her building, the quiet certainty in Damien's voice that this was not random. Fear crept into her chest, cold and unfamiliar. What do you want me to do? She finally asked. Damien studied her for a long moment before answering. Stay close. Not here, not permanently, but close enough that my people can watch over you, until we understand what's happening. I won't force you, but I'm asking. There was something different in the way he said it, less like an order, and more like an actual request, something Elena guessed didn't come easily to a man like him. For how long? She asked. Until I find out who left that ring for you to find, Damien said, and why. Elena looked at him for a long moment, taking in the tension in his shoulders, the guarded stillness in his face that seemed to crack just slightly whenever the conversation turned toward his mother. Whatever coldness the rumors described, she was beginning to see something else beneath it, something wounded that had been locked away for a very long time. All right, she said quietly, I'll stay close. Something eased, almost invisibly, in Damien's expression. Thank you. Odette led Elena to a guest room on the second floor, a space far removed from the cold marble of the entrance hall. It had soft cream walls, a wide bed with pale linens, and a window that looked out over a private garden, where a few late roses still clung to their stems despite the autumn chill. Someone will bring you clothes and anything else you need, Odette said, setting a small tray of tea on the table near the window. You're not a prisoner here. You can move through the house freely, though I'd avoid the east wing. That's where the offices are, and the men who work there don't take well to strangers wandering through. Is Damien always like that? Elena asked, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. So closed off? Odette considered the question for a moment before answering. He wasn't always. I've worked for this family since before he was born. I remember him as a boy, the way he used to laugh, the way he used to run through that garden chasing his mother's dog. That boy disappeared the night she died. What's left is what you saw in that office. A man who decided a long time ago that feeling anything for anyone was too dangerous a risk to take. Elena looked down at her hands. That sounds lonely. It is, Odette said simply, though I don't think he'd ever admit it out loud. She moved toward the door, then paused, glancing back. For what it's worth, the way he looked at you last night, and again this morning, I haven't seen that in a very long time. Be careful with it, whatever it turns out to be. She left before Elena could respond, the door clicking softly shut behind her. Elena sat alone in the quiet room for a long while, sipping tea that had gone lukewarm, staring out at the garden below. She thought about Odette's words, about the boy who used to laugh, about the man who now stood at windows with his back turned to the world, guarding himself against every possible wound. She wondered what it must have been like to lose someone so suddenly, so violently, and to spend 11 years unable to find any answers. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Damien standing there, still dressed in the same dark suit, though he had removed his jacket, his sleeves rolled to the elbow. He looked slightly less like the untouchable figure from the office, and slightly more like an ordinary man, carrying an extraordinary weight. I wanted to see if you were settling in, he said, his tone stiff, as though the gesture of checking on someone was unfamiliar to him. I'm fine, Elena said. Odette has been kind. Damien nodded, his eyes drifting briefly to the garden visible through the window behind her. My mother planted those roses herself. She used to say a garden that survives the cold is worth more than one that only blooms in easy seasons. She sounds like she was wise, Elena said gently. She was, Damien said, his voice quieter than Elena had heard it yet. She believed in second chances, in forgiveness. She used to say I was too much like my father, too quick to see enemies where there might only be strangers. He paused, his jaw tightening. I used to think she was wrong about that. Now I'm not so sure anymore. Elena studied him carefully. Is that your way of saying you don't think I'm an enemy? A faint, almost imperceptible shift crossed his face, something close to the ghost of a smile that vanished before it could fully form. I haven't decided what you are yet, but I don't think you're lying to me, if that's what you're asking. That's something, I suppose, Elena said. It's more than I usually offer, Damien replied. They stood in silence for a moment, the space between them charged with something neither of them seemed ready to name. Finally, Damien stepped back toward the hallway. Dinner will be brought to your room tonight, he said. Rest. Tomorrow I want to take you back to the street where you found the ring. Sometimes a place holds details a memory forgets. All right, Elena said. He turned to leave, then paused at the door, glancing back at her one more time. Elena. Yes? Thank you for staying, he said, and this time the words came out a little less stiff than they had the night before, as though something in him was slowly, carefully, beginning to loosen. He left before she could respond, and Elena stood alone in the quiet room for a long while afterward, watching the last of the daylight fade over the garden, wondering how a single ring found in the mud had managed to unravel the careful, ordinary life she had built for herself. Later that afternoon, Damien stood in his office reviewing a folder Odette had brought him, filled with everything they had gathered on Elena Marchetti in the past 12 hours. Nothing in the file raised any red flags, no criminal record, no known enemies, no connections to any of the families or organizations that might want to use her against him. She was, as far as every record showed, exactly what she appeared to be, an ordinary woman who happened to find something extraordinary in the mud. And yet Damien couldn't shake the feeling that her arrival in his life was not an accident at all, but the opening move in a plan someone had been waiting 11 years to make. He closed the folder and looked once more at the small wooden box on his desk, the ring resting inside it, catching the gray afternoon light. Somewhere out there, whoever had placed it on that street knew exactly what they were doing. He picked up his phone and called Odette. Increase the watch outside the estate tonight, he said. Double the men at the east gate, and send someone to check the church on Faro Street again, quietly. I want to know if anyone else has been near that building in the last few weeks. You think whoever left the ring might come back, Odette said. I think whoever left it wants me to notice, Damien said, his eyes fixed on the darkening garden beyond his window, where somewhere above, in the guest room he had visited only an hour earlier, Elena Marchetti was likely still awake, still turning over questions that had no answers yet. And I intend to make sure they regret it. He ended the call and sat back in his chair, the ring catching the last light of the evening, gold against the dark wood of the box. Whatever game had begun the night Elena Marchetti found that ring in the mud, Damien understood now that it was only the opening move. And Damien intended to find them before they made their next move. Glass shattered somewhere below, and Elena bolted upright in bed, before she even understood why. For a moment, she thought she had imagined it, some half-formed piece of a dream slipping into waking life. Then she heard footsteps pounding down the hallway outside her door, fast and urgent, followed by a voice shouting orders she couldn't quite make out. She threw off the blankets and reached for her robe just as her door burst open. Damien stood in the frame, still dressed though it was the middle of the night, his eyes sharp with alertness. Get away from the window, he said, crossing the room in 3 quick strides and pulling her back by the arm, before she could ask what was happening. What's going on? Elena demanded, her heart pounding. Someone tried to get onto the grounds through the garden gate, Damien said, his voice controlled but tight with restrained tension. My men caught them before they made it past the roses. Whoever it was got away before we could hold them, but they left something behind. Left what? Damien's jaw tightened. He held out his hand, and in his palm sat a small folded piece of paper, edges slightly damp from the night air. Elena took it carefully and unfolded it. Written in careful, deliberate handwriting were only a few words. The ring was only the beginning. Ask her what else she's hiding. Elena's blood went cold. I'm not hiding anything, she said immediately, looking up at Damien, searching his face for any sign of doubt. You have to believe me. For a long, terrible moment, Damien said nothing, his eyes studying her with an intensity that made her chest tighten with fear, not of him exactly, but of what he might be thinking. I believe you, he finally said, and something in Elena's chest loosened slightly with relief. But someone out there wants me to doubt you, someone who knows exactly how to plant suspicion where it will do the most damage. Why would they do that? Elena asked. What could they possibly gain by turning you against me? Distraction, Damien said. If I'm busy questioning you, I'm not looking at whoever actually left this note. It's a tactic. A cheap one, but effective if it works. He folded the paper again and slid it into his pocket. Get dressed. You're not staying in this room tonight. He moved her to a different wing of the house, a room deeper inside the estate, farther from any windows facing the gardens, with 2 guards posted directly outside the door. Elena sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, long after Damien left to oversee the search of the grounds, her mind spinning through everything that had happened in the past 2 days. 3 days ago, her life had been simple and small, unremarkable in every way. Now she was hiding inside a mafia boss's estate, while someone outside tried to plant seeds of doubt about her, someone who apparently knew things about her that even she didn't understand. Sleep didn't come easily that night. When morning finally arrived, gray light filtering weakly through the curtains, Elena found Damien already awake, standing in the kitchen with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched, dark circles beneath his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept at all. Did you find anything? Elena asked. Footprints leading away from the garden gate, gone by the time we reached the street, Damien said. Whoever it was knew this property well enough to find the one blind spot in our camera coverage. That narrows things down. It means we're not dealing with strangers. Whoever is doing this has connections inside my organization, or had them once. That's not comforting, Elena said. No, Damien agreed. It isn't. He finally looked up at her properly, and something in his expression had shifted overnight. The careful distance he usually kept slightly worn down by exhaustion and worry. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Elena straightened. All right. Is there anything in your past, anything at all, connected to organized crime, to old debts, to family you might not talk about often? Even something that seems unimportant to you could matter here. Elena thought carefully before answering, running through her memory for anything that might fit. My father left when I was young. I don't know much about what he did for work, only that my mother never wanted to talk about him. She died when I was 19, and I never went looking for him after that. I don't even know if he's alive. Damien's eyes sharpened slightly. What was his name? Antonio Marchetti, Elena said, though I don't know if that's even real. My mother used to say he changed names more than once. Something crossed Damien's face, quick and unreadable, before he masked it again. I'll have that looked into, he said, quietly. You think my father has something to do with this? I don't know yet, Damien said. But a man who changes his name more than once usually has reasons worth understanding. 2 days after the note appeared, Damien kept his promise and took Elena back to Faro Street. They arrived in the early morning, the street quiet, except for a few pigeons pecking at scraps near the old church steps. 2 guards trailed a careful distance behind, watching every window and doorway along the block. Show me exactly where you found it, Damien said. Elena walked slowly along the sidewalk, retracing her steps from that night, until she reached the drain pipe near the church's side entrance. She crouched down, pointing to the patch of ground where the mud had been disturbed. Here, it was half buried, right against the pipe. Damien crouched beside her, studying the ground, the old brick wall, the boarded windows of the church rising above them. This spot isn't visible from the street, unless you're walking close to the wall, the way you would if you were cutting through in a hurry. That's exactly what I was doing, Elena said. Which means whoever left it either knew your habits or got lucky, Damien said, standing and studying the church itself. Or they left it somewhere they assumed anyone might eventually find it, and simply waited to see who would. He walked toward the church's side door, testing the old lock, which gave way easier than it should have for a building supposedly sealed for over a decade. Inside, dust covered every surface, pews pushed against the walls, stained glass windows dulled with grime, but near the altar, someone had clearly been inside recently. Fresh footprints marked the dusty floor, leading toward a small side room that had once served as an office. Damien pushed the door open carefully. Inside, the room was empty except for a single chair positioned facing the window, as though someone had been sitting there recently, watching the street outside, watching the exact spot where the ring had been left. "Someone's been using this place," Damien said quietly, his voice hard. "Watching this street. Maybe watching you before you ever found anything." Elena felt a chill move through her. "You think they were here the night I found it?" "I think it's very possible," Damien said. He turned to one of his guards. "I want this church watched around the clock starting today. If anyone comes back, I want to know immediately." They left the church in silence, the weight of what they had found settling heavily between them. As they walked back toward the car, Damien glanced at Elena, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't expect this to be the answer I was looking for. I hoped, somehow, that this really was a coincidence, that you really were just a stranger who happened to be walking down the wrong street at the wrong time." "I understand why you had to consider otherwise," Elena said. "I would have wondered the same thing, in your position." "That doesn't make it easier," Damien said, "dragging you into something this dangerous." "You didn't drag me into anything," Elena said. "I walked through your gates myself, remember? Whatever this is, I chose to see it through." Something in Damien's expression softened at that, though he said nothing more as they climbed into the car and drove back toward the estate, the abandoned church shrinking behind them in the rearview mirror, its secrets still only half uncovered. The next few days passed in a strange, tense rhythm. Damien's men searched the city for any trace of who had left the note, questioning contacts, checking old records, following leads that mostly led nowhere. Elena remained inside the estate, restless and increasingly frustrated by the confinement, though she understood the necessity of it. She began spending more time with Damien in the evenings, not because either of them planned it, but because the long hours of waiting and searching seemed to draw them naturally into the same quiet rooms. They would sit together in his study while he reviewed reports, Elena reading books from the estate's library, occasionally breaking the silence with questions that slowly, carefully, began peeling back the layers of a man who had spent 11 years making sure no one ever got close enough to ask them. "Tell me about her," Elena said one evening, nodding toward the photograph on his desk, the woman with kind eyes standing among white roses. "Your mother." Damien was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the edge of a folder without really looking at it. "She believed the family business could be run without becoming the thing everyone assumed we already were. She tried to keep me away from the harder parts of it as long as she could. She wanted something different for me." "What happened to that?" "She died," Damien said simply, "and I stopped believing there was room in this world for the kind of softness she carried. It got her killed. I decided a long time ago it wouldn't get me killed too." "Is that why you never let anyone close?" Elena asked gently. "Why you turned away every woman your family tried to introduce you to?" Damien's eyes lifted to hers, something guarded and searching in them. "How do you know about that?" "Odette mentioned it," Elena admitted. "Not in detail. Just that you'd built a reputation for it." A faint, humorless smile touched his mouth. "They were never interested in me. They were interested in what marrying into this family would give them. Money, protection, a name that made people afraid to cross them. I got tired of being a transaction." "I'm not interested in any of that," Elena said quietly. "I know," Damien said, and the simple certainty in his voice surprised her. "That's what makes this different." The air between them grew heavier, charged with something neither of them had acknowledged out loud. Elena felt her pulse quicken, aware of how close they were sitting, aware of the way his eyes lingered on her face, like he was memorizing something he was afraid to lose. "Damien," she started, unsure what she even meant to say next. Before she could finish, A sharp knock interrupted them, and one of his men stepped into the room, his expression urgent. "Boss, we found something. You need to see this." Damien rose immediately, the careful softness of a moment ago, vanishing back beneath the controlled mask he wore for everyone else. "What is it?" "Security footage from 3 streets over, the night before the note was left," the man said. "There's a woman on it, watching the estate. We ran her face through everything we have. She's not a stranger, boss. She used to work here, years ago, before your mother died. Her name is Cordelia Vane." Damien went very still. "That's not possible. She left the city after the investigation. We were told she moved abroad." "Apparently not," the man said. "The footage is clear. She's been in the city for at least a week, maybe longer." Elena watched the color drain slightly from Damien's face, the first real crack of shock she had seen since meeting him. "Who is she?" Elena asked carefully. "She used to be my mother's assistant," Damien said, his voice low and tight. "She was one of the last people to see her alive the night she died. The investigation cleared her, but I never fully believed it. I wanted to look deeper, but she disappeared before I got the chance, and my father called off the search, said it wasn't worth chasing ghosts." "After it happened," Damien continued, almost as if he hadn't heard her, "I remember my father sitting at this exact desk, going through every piece of paper Cordelia had ever touched, looking for something, anything, that would explain why my mother went to that church alone that night. He never found it. Or if he did, he never told me." "Maybe he was protecting you," Elena said. "Maybe," Damien said. "Or maybe he simply wanted it buried, the same way he wanted every soft part of this family buried after that night. Grief made him harder. It made me harder too. I used to think that was strength. Now I wonder how much of it was just fear wearing a different name." "You think she's involved," Elena said. "I think it's no longer a coincidence," Damien said, his eyes hard now, the warmth from moments earlier locked away behind something colder and more dangerous. "The ring resurfaces. A note appears warning me to doubt you. And now the one person who was closest to my mother the night she died turns up watching this house from the shadows." He turned to his man. "Find her. I don't care what it takes. I want her found before she disappears again." The man nodded and left quickly, and Damien stood in the center of the room, his hands clenched at his sides, the quiet moment between him and Elena shattered completely by the weight of what had just been uncovered. "Damien," Elena said softly, stepping closer despite the danger radiating off him, "whatever this is, we'll figure it out together." He turned to look at her, and for a moment, the hard mask slipped just enough to reveal the exhaustion and grief underneath it. 11 years of unanswered questions finally beginning to crack open. "I've spent over a decade telling myself I didn't need anyone," he said quietly. "I don't know how to do this differently." "You don't have to know," Elena said. "You just have to let someone stand beside you while you try." Damien didn't answer, but he didn't pull away either, and for the first time since she had walked through his gates 3 nights ago, Elena saw something in his eyes that looked less like suspicion and more like the beginning of trust. Later that night, after the estate had gone quiet, and most of the guards had rotated into their overnight positions, Damien stood once again at his office window, staring out over the dark garden. Elena found him there, unable to sleep herself, and stood quietly beside him for a while before speaking. "What was she like?" Elena asked. "Cordelia Vane, before all of this." Damien's jaw tightened. "My mother trusted her completely. She handled correspondence, scheduling, the kind of quiet work that puts someone inside every room without anyone noticing they're there. Looking back, I wonder how much she actually saw, how much she knew, and never told anyone." "Do you think she was involved in what happened to your mother?" "I don't know," Damien admitted. "The investigation cleared her, but investigations can be bought, buried, or simply wrong. I was 17 when it happened. I wasn't in a position to question anything. By the time I was old enough to demand real answers, she was already gone, and my father refused to reopen old wounds." "And now she's back," Elena said. "Now she's back," Damien repeated, his voice quiet and hard. "Watching this house, watching you, which means whatever she wants, it isn't finished yet." Elena studied his profile in the dim light, the tension carved into every line of his face. "We'll find her," she said. "And when we do, You'll finally have the answers you've been waiting 11 years for. Damien turned to look at her, something unguarded flickering behind his tired eyes. I hope you're right. Outside, the night stretched dark and quiet over the city, but somewhere within it, a woman named Cordelia Vane moved carefully through the shadows, watching, waiting, holding secrets that had remained buried for 11 long years, secrets that were about to come crashing back into the light, whether Damien Cross was ready for them or not. 2 days after the visit to the church, Odette entered Damien's office carrying a thin folder, her expression careful in a way that told him the contents were not going to be simple. We found something on Elena's father, she said, setting the folder on the desk. Antonio Marchetti wasn't just a man who disappeared from his family. He worked the docks for the Kessler family 15 years ago, before he vanished entirely. Some of the old-timers remember him as someone who moved money quietly between accounts nobody was supposed to know about. Damien opened the folder, scanning the details slowly. Money laundering. Among other things, Odette said. He disappeared not long before your mother died. Some of the older contacts think he might have crossed the wrong people and simply vanished for his own safety. Others think he might have known something about what was coming. Damien sat back in his chair, processing the information carefully. Does Elena know any of this? Based on what she told you, I doubt it, Odette said. She said her mother never spoke of him. It's possible she genuinely has no idea what her father was involved in. Or it's possible someone wants us to think that, Damien said quietly, the old suspicion creeping back despite everything he had begun to feel toward Elena over the past several days. A daughter who happens to find a missing ring on the exact street where her father once worked, tied to the same family now surfacing to threaten everything I've built. That's a lot of coincidence for one person to carry innocently. Or it's simply the truth, Odette said carefully. Sometimes the past reaches forward without anyone intending it to. Don't let suspicion turn you against her before you have real proof, Damien. You've spent 11 years alone because you let fear make your decisions for you. Don't let it happen again. Damien said nothing, staring down at the folder, the weight of old grief and fresh uncertainty pressing against him in equal measure. Before he could decide how to raise the subject with Elena, his lieutenant knocked and entered, carrying something that would make the question far more complicated than he expected. A single photograph landed on Damien's desk, and every ounce of warmth drained from his face in an instant. Where did you get this? He demanded, staring down at the image, his voice dropping into something dangerously quiet. The man standing across from him, one of Damien's most trusted lieutenants, shifted uncomfortably. One of our contacts inside the harbor district sent it over an hour ago, boss. Said you needed to see it before anyone else did. The photograph showed Elena, taken from a distance with a long lens, standing outside a small building near the docks, deep in conversation with a woman Damien recognized instantly, despite the years that had passed. Cordelia Vane. When was this taken? Damien asked. 3 days ago, the lieutenant said. Before she came to live here. Damien's jaw tightened, his mind spinning through every conversation he'd had with Elena since that first rainy night, searching for anything that might explain what he was looking at. Bring her to me. Now. Elena arrived minutes later, confused by the urgency in the summons, and stopped short the moment she saw the photograph on Damien's desk and the expression on his face. What is this? She asked, though something in her stomach had already gone cold with dread. You tell me, Damien said, his voice colder than she had heard it since the very first night they met. You told me you never had any connection to my mother's death. You told me you found that ring by accident. Yet here you are, 3 days before you ever walked through my gates, meeting privately with the one woman I believe is responsible for everything that's happened. Elena stared at the photograph, her mind racing to make sense of it. I don't know her. I've never met a woman named Cordelia Vane in my life. Then explain this, Damien said, tapping the photograph. Explain why you're standing outside a warehouse near the docks, talking to her like old friends. Elena leaned closer, studying the image, and slowly, her confusion shifted into something else. A dawning, uneasy recognition. That's not me, she said. It looks exactly like you, Damien said, then added, his voice harder now. And it isn't the only thing troubling me today. Odette found records connecting your father to the Kessler family, from years before he disappeared. He worked their docks, moved their money. That's the same family Cordelia may be meeting with tonight, and the same street where you claim to have stumbled onto that ring by pure chance. Elena's face paled. I didn't know that. I told you. I never knew what my father did. My mother wouldn't even say his name most days. That's a very convenient gap in your memory, Damien said, though even as the words left his mouth, something in his own voice sounded unconvinced, like he was testing the accusation rather than believing it. It's not me, Elena repeated, more firmly this time. Look at the coat. I don't own anything like that. And my hair was different 3 days ago. I had it pulled back that entire week for work. Whoever this is, she looks like me, but it isn't me. Damien studied the photograph again, his jaw working as he fought to separate suspicion from the sudden uncertainty creeping into his expression. A double, he said slowly. Someone who resembles you closely enough to be mistaken in a photograph. Or someone who wanted to make sure it looked exactly like me, Elena said, her voice trembling slightly now as the full weight of it settled over her. Someone who wanted you to see this and believe I had been lying to you the entire time. Silence stretched between them, thick and uncertain. Damien looked at her for a long moment, torn between the instinct that had kept him alive for 11 years and something newer, something that had been growing quietly since the night she first stepped into his office, refusing to look away even when her hands were shaking. I want to believe you, he finally said. But you don't, Elena said quietly, the hurt evident in her voice despite her effort to keep it steady. I didn't say that, Damien said. I said I want to. 11 years of watching everyone around me lie for their own gain has made that harder than it should be. Then trust your instincts instead of a photograph, Elena said, stepping closer despite the tension crackling in the room. You've spent days with me, Damien. You know how I answer your questions. You know I never once asked you for anything, never tried to use what's happening between us for my own advantage. Does any of that add up to someone secretly working with the woman responsible for your mother's death? Damien's eyes searched hers, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, the only sound the quiet ticking of the clock on his desk. No, he finally admitted, his shoulders loosening slightly. It doesn't. My father leaving my mother and me behind, and whatever he was involved in 15 years ago, isn't something I chose, Elena said, her voice trembling with a mix of hurt and frustration. I can't be blamed for a man I never knew. If anything, it makes me want the truth even more than you do. Maybe finding that ring wasn't pure chance. Maybe some part of me was always walking toward this without knowing why. But that doesn't make me your enemy, Damien. Something in Damien's chest loosened at the raw honesty in her voice, the suspicion slowly giving way again to the trust he had been fighting to hold on to all afternoon. Then someone wants you to doubt me, Elena said. Just like the note. Someone is working very hard to drive a wall between us. The question is why, Damien said, though the hard edge in his voice had softened considerably. If Cordelia wanted to hurt me, there are simpler ways than staging photographs of a woman who looks like you. Unless it isn't about hurting you directly, Elena said slowly, an idea forming as she spoke. Unless it's about isolating you, making you push away the one person who might actually be helping you find the truth, so you're alone again, the way you've been for 11 years. Easier to move against a man who trusts no one than a man who has someone standing beside him. Damien's eyes sharpened at that, something clicking into place behind them. That's exactly the kind of strategy Cordelia would have learned working this close to my family for so many years. She understood exactly how this world operates. She'd know isolating me would make me easier to manipulate. He turned toward his lieutenant, still standing near the door. I want everything on this photograph traced. Who took it? Where it came from? And I want to know if there's a woman working with Cordelia who resembles Elena closely enough to be mistaken for her at a distance. The lieutenant nodded and left quickly, and Damien turned back to Elena, the coldness that had filled his expression moments earlier, now replaced by something closer to regret. I shouldn't have doubted you, he said quietly. You were protecting yourself, Elena said. After everything you've lost, I understand why trust doesn't come easily. That's not an excuse, Damien said. You've done nothing but tell me the truth since the moment you walked through those gates. and the first sign of manipulation nearly convinced me otherwise. That's exactly the weakness someone like Cordelia would count on. Elena reached out, resting her hand gently on his arm, the first time she had touched him since arriving at the estate. Then don't let her win. Trust what you know, instead of what someone wants you to believe. Damien looked down at her hand, then up at her face, something shifting behind his eyes that looked almost like relief. I don't know how to do this, he admitted quietly, trusting someone, letting them close enough to matter. I gave up on that a long time ago. You don't have to know how, Elena said, echoing the words she had offered him days earlier. You just have to choose it, again and again, even when it's difficult. For a long moment, the space between them grew quiet and charged, the tension of the afternoon slowly giving way to something softer. Damien reached up, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch careful, as though he were afraid of breaking something fragile. Elena, he said softly. Before he could say anything more, the door burst open, and the lieutenant returned, his expression grim. Boss, we found her, he said. Cordelia Vane. She's holed up in a building near the old fishing docks, the same district as the photograph. But that's not all. We intercepted a call from inside the building an hour ago. She's not alone. She's meeting with someone from the Kessler family tonight. Damien's entire posture changed, the softness of a moment ago vanishing beneath something sharp and dangerous. The Kesslers have wanted this territory for years. If Cordelia is working with them now, this isn't just about my mother's death anymore. This is about taking down everything my family has built. What do we do? Elena asked. We move tonight, Damien said, already crossing the room to retrieve a jacket from the back of his chair, before they have the chance to finish whatever they're planning. I'm coming with you, Elena said. Absolutely not, Damien said immediately. It's too dangerous. You said yourself someone wants to isolate you, Elena said, standing firm despite the fear tightening in her chest. Sending me away right now plays exactly into that. Besides, if this is truly about the night your mother died, I want to be there when the truth finally comes out. I've been part of this since the moment I picked that ring out of the mud. I'm not walking away now. Damien studied her for a long moment, torn between the instinct to protect her and the growing understanding that she had already proven, again and again, that she would not be pushed aside easily. Finally, he nodded, though the tension in his jaw remained. You stay close to me, he said. No matter what happens tonight, you do not leave my side. I won't, Elena promised. As the estate around them shifted into motion, guards gathering weapons, cars being prepared in the courtyard below, Damien paused once more at the office door, looking back at Elena, with an expression that carried more weight than words could hold. Whatever happens tonight, he said quietly, I need you to know that I don't regret trusting you. Whatever Cordelia and the Kesslers are planning, they made one mistake. They underestimated what it means to have someone standing beside me instead of against me. Elena held his gaze, steady despite the fear coursing through her. Then let's go finish this. The courtyard buzzed with quiet, controlled activity as they descended the stairs. Guards moved in practiced formation, checking weapons, loading into 2 black cars parked near the fountain. Odette met them at the base of the stairs, her expression tight with worry. Damien, are you certain about bringing her along? Odette asked, glancing at Elena. The docks aren't a place for someone unfamiliar with this world. She's staying close to me the entire time, Damien said, and she's earned the right to be here. Odette studied Elena for a long moment, then nodded slowly, something like respect settling into her expression. Be careful, both of you. They climbed into the back of the lead car, Damien's driver pulling out through the gates and into the quiet streets beyond. Elena watched the city slide past the window, the familiar shops and corners of her ordinary life now feeling distant and strange, as though they belonged to someone else's memory. Tell me about the Kesslers, she said, needing something to focus on besides the tightening knot of fear in her chest. They've run the western docks for 2 generations, Damien said, his eyes fixed ahead, his hands resting tensely on his knees. My father and their father kept an uneasy peace for years. mostly because neither side wanted the kind of war that would draw police attention to both territories. When my mother died, there were whispers that the Kesslers had something to do with it, hoping to weaken us enough to take our ports. Nothing was ever proven. I always assumed the rumors were simply that, rumors, the kind that spread whenever something terrible happens without a clear explanation. But now, Elena said. Now I'm not sure what to believe, Damien admitted. If Cordelia is meeting with them tonight, after resurfacing with the ring and the note and everything else, it's hard to see it as coincidence anymore. The car slowed as they entered the docks district, warehouses looming on either side, their metal walls rusted and streaked with years of salt air. The streets grew narrower, quieter, lit only by scattered floodlights that left long stretches of shadow between them. Damien's phone buzzed, and he answered quickly, listening for a moment before ending the call. They've confirmed the location, he said. Warehouse 14, near the old loading cranes. My men have it surrounded, but I told them to hold position until we arrive. I want to see this myself. What if it's a trap? Elena asked quietly. What if they knew you'd come the moment you found out? Damien's jaw tightened. Then we'll be ready for that too. The car finally stopped a block away from the warehouse, and Damien's men gathered in the shadows nearby, weapons secured but not drawn, waiting for his signal. Damien turned to Elena one last time before they stepped out into the cold night air. Stay behind me, he said. Whatever you see in there, whatever is said, let me handle it. Can you do that? Elena nodded, her throat too tight for words, and followed him out of the car into the dark. Outside, the night had already begun to settle over the city, cold and clear, the kind of stillness that always seemed to come right before a storm. Somewhere near the docks, in a building surrounded by shadows, Cordelia Vane sat across from a man whose family had wanted the Cross Empire destroyed for years, unaware that the very people she had tried to keep apart were now moving toward her together, united instead of divided, ready to finally uncover the truth that had remained buried for 11 long years. The warehouse loomed ahead in the darkness, its corrugated walls rusted and streaked with salt, a single crack of light escaping from beneath one of the loading doors. Damien raised a hand, signaling his men to hold their positions along the perimeter while he moved closer. Elena's hand gripped tightly in his own. Remember what I told you, he murmured. Stay close. Whatever happens in there, you don't leave my side. I remember, Elena whispered back, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain he could hear it too. They approached the smaller side entrance, two of Damien's men, easing the door open just enough to slip through, without announcing their arrival. Inside, the warehouse stretched out in dim, uneven light, towering stacks of shipping crates casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Voices carried faintly from somewhere near the center of the building, low and urgent, though the words were impossible to make out from this distance. Damien moved forward carefully, keeping to the shadows along the wall, his men fanning out silently behind him. Elena followed as closely as she could manage, her pulse pounding in her ears, every creak of the old building sounding like a warning. They rounded a final stack of crates, and the source of the voices came into view. Cordelia Vane stood beneath a single hanging light near the center of the loading bay, speaking quietly, with a heavy-set man Elena didn't recognize, two guards positioned near them with weapons visible at their sides. Damien's grip on Elena's hand tightened, and for a moment he simply watched, absorbing the sight of the woman who had haunted the edges of his family's history for 11 years, standing right in front of him at last. Then he gave a small, sharp nod to his men, and the loading bay erupted into sudden motion. A single gunshot cracked through the warehouse, and Elena's whole body flinched before she understood no one had been hit. Damien's men had moved fast once the signal was given, spreading through the loading bay of Warehouse 14, in careful, coordinated positions. The shot had come from a Kessler guard near the far wall, fired into the air as a warning the moment he spotted movement near the entrance. Within seconds, Damien's men had the room secured, weapons trained on the small group gathered near a stack of shipping crates under a single hanging light. Cordelia Vane stood at the center of it, older than Damien remembered, but unmistakably the same woman from his childhood, her expression calm despite the guns now pointed in her direction. Beside her stood a heavy-set man Elena didn't recognize, though the way Damien's jaw tightened at the sight of him suggested this was someone significant, likely the head of the Kessler family himself. "Damien," Cordelia said, her voice carrying an eerie steadiness. "I wondered how long it would take you to find this place." 11 years, Damien said, stepping further into the light, Elena close behind him, just as he'd instructed. 11 years of wondering what happened to my mother, and you've been alive this entire time, hiding, while I searched for answers you could have given me at any point. "I didn't hide from you," Cordelia said. "I hid from them." She nodded toward the Kessler man beside her, whose face remained carefully blank. "The same people who killed your mother, Damien. I've spent 11 years trying to gather enough proof to bring them down, without getting myself killed in the process." The Kessler man finally spoke, his voice low and unbothered. "That's a generous version of events, Cordelia. Perhaps you should tell him the rest." Cordelia's composure cracked, just slightly. "Your mother found out about a shipment your father had agreed to move through this warehouse 15 years ago, something far more dangerous than the usual cargo. She was going to expose it, go to the authorities, end an arrangement she believed had gone too far. She met me at the church that night because she trusted me to help her decide what to do next. And instead," Damien said, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury, "you told them." "I didn't have a choice," Cordelia said, her eyes glistening now, the years of guilt finally breaking through the calm she had worn like armor. "They already knew. Someone else in your father's circle had informed them, long before she ever spoke to me. I tried to warn her. I tried to get her to leave the city that same night, but she wouldn't listen. She said she had to see it through, had to protect what your family had built from becoming something monstrous." Elena watched Damien absorb every word, his hands clenched at his sides, 11 years of grief and unanswered questions, finally colliding with the truth he had spent so long searching for. "The ring," Damien said. "How did it end up in the mud outside that church?" "It fell from her hand during the struggle," Cordelia said quietly. "I found it afterward, hidden in the grass near the drainpipe. I couldn't bring myself to keep it, and I couldn't bring myself to return it to your family without exposing my own part in what happened. So I buried it there, half hoping someone would find it someday, half hoping I would find the courage to dig it up myself and finally tell you everything." "And Elena," Damien said, his eyes flicking briefly to her before returning to Cordelia. "Why involve her?" "I didn't," Cordelia said. "Not directly. When I finally worked up the courage to retrieve the ring myself last month, I found it was already gone. I assumed someone had stumbled onto it by chance, and when I learned who, and that her father had once worked these same docks, I thought perhaps fate had simply decided to tie these threads together on its own. I never sent that note. I never staged that photograph. That wasn't me." The Kessler man shifted slightly, and Elena felt Damien's whole body tense beside her. "But it was you," Damien said slowly, turning his full attention toward the Kessler man now. "You've been trying to isolate me this entire time. Sending the note, staging the photograph with a woman made to look like Elena. You needed me distracted, suspicious, alone, while you finished whatever business you started with my mother's death 15 years ago." The Kessler man's calm finally slipped, just slightly, into something colder. "Your family has controlled the ports for 2 generations, Cross. It was always going to end eventually. I simply saw an opportunity when Cordelia resurfaced and decided to use it. A distracted man makes mistakes. A man consumed with doubt about the people closest to him becomes very easy to remove." "You underestimated something," Damien said, his voice low and dangerous now, steady in a way that made even his own men straighten. "You assumed isolating me would work, because it always had before. You didn't account for the fact that this time, I chose not to let it." He glanced at Elena, just briefly, something unspoken passing between them, before his attention snapped back to the Kessler man with lethal focus. "You have 2 choices," Damien said. "You leave this city tonight, permanently, taking every claim you've ever had to these docks with you, or my men make sure you never leave this warehouse at all. Given everything you've just admitted in front of witnesses, I don't think the second option troubles me nearly as much as it should." The tension in the room stretched taut, every guard on both sides watching for the first sign of movement. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then the Kessler man's shoulders dropped. the fight draining out of him, as he realized the position he had put himself in, surrounded, outnumbered, and exposed. "This isn't over," he muttered, though the words carried little weight behind them. "It is for you," Damien said. "Get out of my territory." The Kessler man left with his remaining guards, disappearing into the dark beyond the warehouse doors, leaving only Cordelia standing alone under the hanging light, her shoulders shaking with the release of 11 years of carried guilt. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, looking at Damien with eyes that finally showed the full weight of everything she had carried. "I should have found the courage to tell you the truth years ago. I let fear keep me silent, and it cost you more years of wondering than you should have ever had to endure." Damien studied her for a long moment, the anger in his expression slowly giving way to something closer to exhaustion. "You should have," he said. "But you're telling me now, that has to count for something." Elena stepped forward slightly, drawing Cordelia's attention. "For what it's worth, I don't think you're the villain in this story. I think you were a young woman caught between people far more powerful than you, forced into an impossible position. That doesn't erase the pain it caused, but it isn't the same as choosing to cause it." Cordelia looked at her with something close to gratitude. "You're kinder than I deserve." "Maybe," Elena said, "or maybe kindness is exactly what this family has been missing for 11 years. Damien glanced at her, something unreadable but warm passing through his eyes at her words, before he turned his attention back to Cordelia. "What happens to me now?" Cordelia asked. "You'll give a full statement," Damien said. "Everything you know, everything you saw that night, everything about the Kesslers' involvement. After that, you're free to go. Wherever you decide is far enough away from all of this." Cordelia nodded, tears finally falling freely now. 11 years of buried grief and guilt breaking loose all at once. Damien's men escorted her out gently, leaving Damien and Elena alone in the quiet warehouse, the hanging light swaying slightly above them in the cold night air, drifting through the open doors. "It's over," Elena said softly, stepping closer to him. "It's over," Damien repeated, though his voice carried a complicated mixture of relief and grief. 11 years of searching finally reaching an answer that brought no one back, only understanding. He turned to face her fully, the hard mask he had worn for so long completely gone now, replaced by something open and unguarded that Elena had only glimpsed in small moments before tonight. "You didn't have to come here," he said. "You didn't have to stay through any of this. From the very first night, you could have handed over that ring and walked away from all of it." "I know," Elena said. "Why didn't you?" Elena considered the question carefully, searching for the truest answer she could give. "Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about returning something that wasn't mine. It became about you, about the man underneath everything the rest of the city was afraid of. I wanted to know him. I still do." Damien reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the small wooden box he had carried with him since that very first night, opening it to reveal the ring resting inside, gold catching the dim warehouse light. "This ring caused 11 years of silence in my family," he said quietly. 11 years of walls I built so high, I convinced myself nothing could ever reach me again. And then you walked through my gates, soaked from the rain, refusing to be afraid of me, and something I thought had died a long time ago started waking up again." He took Elena's hand gently, placing the ring into her palm, closing her fingers around it. "I'm not asking you to carry the weight of what happened to my mother," he said. "I'm asking you to help me build something new, instead of standing guard over everything I lost. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet. I've spent so long pushing everyone away that I barely remember how to let someone stay. But I want to learn, with you, if you're willing." Tears gathered in Elena's eyes as she looked down at the ring in her palm, then back up at him. "I'm willing," she said softly. Around them, Damien's men began the quiet work of clearing the warehouse, securing the scene, escorting the remaining guards out into the night. But for a moment, neither Damien nor Elena paid any attention to the activity surrounding them. The world had narrowed down to the small space between them, the ring now resting safely in Elena's palm, the years of grief and suspicion that had brought them to this exact moment finally beginning to settle into something quieter, something that felt, for the first time in a very long time, like peace. "I should have trusted you from the beginning," Damien said quietly. Instead of letting every rumor, every trained instinct, every old wound, tell me you couldn't possibly be exactly what you seemed. You trusted me enough to bring me here tonight, Elena said. Enough to let me stand beside you instead of somewhere far away and safe. That has to count for something too. It counts for everything, Damien said. And this time, when he looked at her, there was no guard left in his eyes at all. Nothing hidden, nothing held back. For the first time since she had met him, standing frozen in the rain outside his gates, Damien Cross smiled, a real smile, unguarded and warm, the kind that transformed his entire face into something the city had never been allowed to see. Outside, the night had finally begun to soften toward morning, gray light creeping slowly over the docks, chasing away the last of the shadows that had followed them since the very beginning. Whatever the coldest man in the city had been before this, whatever the rumors had made of him, Elena understood now that none of it had ever been the whole truth. He had simply been waiting, all this time, for someone patient enough to prove that not everyone who came close intended to take something from him. And as they walked out of the warehouse together, the ring safe in Elena's hand and the weight of 11 years finally lifted from Damien's shoulders, the city stretched out before them, no longer a place of cold suspicion and closed doors, but the quiet beginning of something neither of them had expected to find. Weeks later, the estate looked different in ways that had little to do with the building itself. Sunlight fell through the tall windows of Damien's office each morning now, the heavy curtains pulled back instead of drawn shut against the world. Odette often remarked, quietly and with a knowing smile, that she hadn't seen the house feel this alive since before Damien's mother had passed. Cordelia's full statement had led to a quiet but decisive shift in power along the docks, the Kessler family's grip on their territory crumbling under the weight of exposed corruption, old alliances turning away from them one by one. Damien handled it all with a steadiness that surprised even his own men, less interested in revenge than in finally closing the door on 11 years of unanswered pain. Elena stood in the garden one afternoon, tending carefully to the white roses her mother-in-law would never get to meet, when Damien found her there, watching quietly from the doorway, before stepping out to join her. Odette tells me you've been out here every day this week, he said, coming to stand beside her. They needed someone to look after them, Elena said, brushing dirt from her hands. Your mother clearly loved this garden. It felt wrong to let it go untended. Damien looked around at the roses, blooming fuller now than they had in years, and something soft settled into his expression. She would have liked you, he said quietly. I used to think no one would ever understand this family well enough to belong here. I was wrong. Elena reached for his hand, the ring he had given her weeks ago catching the afternoon light on her finger. I think she'd be glad to know you finally let someone in. Damien pulled her close, resting his forehead gently against hers. The coldness, the entire city once believed, defined him nowhere to be found in that quiet, unguarded moment. I used to believe love was a weakness in this world, he murmured, something that got people killed, something I couldn't afford. And now? Elena asked softly. Now I think it might be the only thing worth protecting at all, he said. They stood together in the garden, as the afternoon light stretched long and golden across the grass, the city beyond the estate walls carrying on with its usual noise and motion, unaware that the coldest man it had ever known had finally, quietly, let someone stay.